In today's lesson, we're going to divide decimals to the tenths and hundredths by 10, and we'll divide tenths and hundredths by multiples of 10. All right, so we're going to start by talking and looking at what happens to a number when we divide it by 10. Now, just a reminder that in our place value system, it is called the base 10 system because each place value is built up to 10, and then we have to regroup to the next place value. So when we were multiplying by 10 or 100 or 1,000, each digit became 10 times its value as we moved in the place value chart. So now when we're dividing and when we were multiplying, we were moving up the chart. And now that we are dividing each digit or each number in each number's place value or each number's value will become 1/10 of its value as we move to the right, as we divide the numbers. So let's start by building the number 120. So if we were building this in our place value chart, we would have one place value chip in the hundredths place to represent the 100 and two place value chips in the tens place to represent the 20, or the two tens, which would give us 20. Now, if we were going to divide 120 by 10, we're saying how many tens are in 120? Well, if we did the standard algorithm over here and said, okay, how many tens are in 120, we could see there would be 12 tens in 120. So when we divide 120 by 10, the 100, there is 1 10 and 2 ones. 1 10 and 2 ones. And so when we divide 120 by 10, we get 12. Now just take a moment to look and notice what happened in the place value chart and what happened in with our quotient, maybe with our number sentence and our quotient. So just take a minute and look, and then we're going to see what happens when we divide 10 by 10. All right, so when we build the number 10, we have one place value chip in our tens place to represent the 10. And when we divide 10 by 10, again, it's like saying how many tens are in 10. Well, we know that there is 1. And so when we divide 10 by 10, we get one place value chip in the ones place. And 10 divided by 10 is 1. So again, look at what's happening in the place value chart. Compare it with what you notice happening in our number sentence and what's happening when we divide 10 by 10. Okay, so let's try 1. When we can build 1 in our place value chart, and you can see we have the 1 place value chip in the ones column. And when we divide 1 by 10, let's see what happens. We're saying how many tens are in 1? Well, there are 0 tens in 1, but we can take that 1 and regroup it into 10 tenths. And how many tens are in 10? How many tens are in 10? We would have 1 tenth. And so when we say how many tens are in 1, there is 1/10. tens in 1. And so look again in the place value chart. That 1 becomes 1/10. When we divide that 1 into 10 equal groups, there's 1/10 in each group. Again, look for any patterns you notice in what's happening in the place value chart or what's happening in the number system, or in our number sentence, excuse me. Let's try it. Let's do one last one and then we'll start talking about what we're noticing. Okay, let's go ahead now and look at 1/10. And you can see we've built that over here in the place value chart with our 1 place value chip in the 10ths place. And now we're going to see what we get, or what happens when we see how many tens are in 1/10. Okay, so we put our decimal point in our quotient lined up with the decimal point in our dividend. And so we can see that there are 0 tens in 1/10. But we can regroup that 10th into 10 hundredths. And there's 10 divided by 10, or 10 goes into 10 once. And so we get nothing left over. So there is, when we ask ourselves how many tens are in 1/10, there's 1/100th in 1/10. And again, look in our place value chart to see what's happening as when we divide a 10th into 10 equal groups. There's going to be 1/100th in each group. So let's look to see what patterns we're noticing now when we divide numbers by 10. So in the place value chart, you probably started seeing how our place value chips were moving 1 place value to the right as we divided by 10. And if we look at what's happening with the decimal point, okay, here's the decimal point in 120, and here's the decimal point in our quotient, 12. So you may have noticed that the decimal point moved 1 place to the left. And when we divide 10 by 10, well, here's the decimal point in 10, here's the decimal point in our quotient. And so when we divide it by 10, again, the decimal point moved 1 place to the left. And when we divide 1 by 10, here's our decimal point. And when we divide it by 10, you can see our decimal point moved 1 place to the right to give us, 1 place to the left to give us 1/10. And finally, when we divided 1/10 by 10, here's our decimal point. And when we divided by 10, it moved 1 place to the left, giving us the quotient of 0.01 or 0.01. So you're starting to probably notice some of those patterns. Let's look at a few more examples together. So if we had the number 163, that would be 100, 6 tens, and 3 ones. And when we divide 163 by 10, let's look to see what our quotient is. And I have a remainder of 3, but I'm going to regroup those 3 ones into tenths, and I have 30 tenths. Add my decimal point to my quotient, and now we have a number divided equally. So our quotient is 16 and 3/10. So we have 1 10, 6 ones, and 3/10. So again, notice what's happening in our place value chart. when we divide by 10. And notice what's happening to the decimal. Here's the decimal in our dividend. And when we divide by 10, you can see our decimal point has moved one place to the left for our quotient of 16.3. Let's look at the number 72 and 6/10. There are 7 tens, 2 ones, and 6/10. And when we divide 72.6 divided by 10, let's erase that real quick and divide that. So 72.6 divided by 10. Don't forget to put your decimal point in the quotient. And I need to regroup those 6/10 with the thousandths. So now I have 60 thousandths. And now we're done. So in our quotient, it's 7 and 26 hundredths. So we have 7 ones, 2 tenths, and 6 hundredths. And again, notice the movement in our place value chart between the dividend and the quotient when we're dividing by 10. Also notice what's happening with the decimal point. The decimal point was between the 2 and the 6. When we divided by 10, it moved one place to the left to give us 7.26. And finally, let's look at 29 hundredths. So 2 tenths and 9 hundredths. When we divide 29 hundredths by 10, our decimal point up there, we have 0 tens go into 2 tenths. Oops, that means to be a 0. 29 divided by 10 would be 2. And we need to regroup those 9 hundredths to 90 thousandths. And there would be 9. So our quotient would be 29 thousandths. So that would be 0 tenths, 2 hundredths, and 9 thousandths. So again, noticing the movement in our place value chart as we divide by 10, and noticing the movement in our decimal point as we divide by 10. Okay, so now understanding what happens when we divide a number by 10, let's look and complete some of these problems. So 291 divided by 10, the decimal point in 291 is after the 1 because it is a whole number. When we divide by 10, the decimal point moves one place to the left. So our quotient would be 29 and 1/10. Will you go on and complete 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then check back to see if your thinking matches mine? Now that we understand the process of dividing a number by 10, let's look to see if we can figure out what the missing divisor or the missing dividend might be based on what's happening with the decimal point. So let's look at number 7. 45 and 6/10 divided by a number gives us 4 and 56/100. So our decimal point is here when we start. It's here in our quotient. So we can see that the decimal point moved one place to the left, which tells us that we divided by 10. Let's look at number 8. 55/100 divided by a number gives us 55 thousandths. Here was the decimal point in my dividend. Here's the decimal point in my quotient. We can see that it moved one place to the right for our quotient. So again, we know we were dividing by 10. Now in this case, we can see that our decimal point in our quotient is between the 9 and the 1. So when we are dividing by 10, this means that the decimal point must have been between the 1 and the 4 if it had to move one place to the left for our quotient. So 391.4 divided by 10 would give us 39.14. And same thing with number 10. If we have 1 and 8 thousandths as our quotient, when we're dividing by 10, okay, that decimal point needed to be between these two zeros so that in our answer, if it moved one place to the left when we divide by 10, then it would be 1.008 as it is in that quotient. So we know that 10.08 or 10 and 8/100 divided by 10 is 1 and 8 thousandths. Now that we understand how to divide decimals by tens, we can break apart numbers to divide whole numbers. We have our little friend reminding us down here that to divide decimals by multiples of 10, we just use the same rule as dividing whole numbers by multiples of 10. So let's start by looking at a whole number example. It says divide 60 by 20. Well, I know that 60 divided by 2 is 30. And so 30 divided by 10 is 3. So 60 divided by 20 is 3. We can use the same method to divide decimals. So if we had 6 divided by 20, we can do the basic fact of 6 divided by 2, which we know is 3. And then if we divide 3 by 10, we know what's going to happen to that decimal point. If our decimal point is after the 3, when we divide by 10, it's going to move one place to the left, which will give us 3/10. So 6 divided by 20 is 3/10. When we divide 6 into 20 equal groups, there's 3/10 in each group. Let's look at another example. When we have 6/10 divided by 20, or if we're taking 6/10 and dividing it into 20 equal groups, well, we can take 6/10 divided by 2. We know that's going to be 3/10. That should be a basic fact. And when we divide 3/10 by 10, we know that that rule for dividing by 10 moves the decimal point one place to the left. And so our quotient, or our answer, is 3 thousandths. So when 6/10 is divided into 20 equal groups, there's 3 hundredths in each group, or 0.03. So let's put this into practice together. 18 divided by 30. Well, I know that 18 divided by 3 is 6. And so 6 divided by 10. If the decimal point is right here in 6, I know that then in my quotient, when I'm dividing by 10, it's going to move one place to the left. So it would be 6/10. And if we want to check that with actual division, looking to see what 18 divided by 30 would be, we can see indeed that our quotient would be 6/10. Okay, let's look at 1.6 divided by 40. Well, we know the basic fact, 1.6 divided by 4 would be 4/10. And then 4/10 divided by 10, because we're just breaking 40 into 4 times 10. And so 4/10 divided by 10, we know the rule of moving the decimal point one place to the left. So this would equal 0.04. And if we check with actual division, 1.6 divided by 40, we can see that the quotient is 0.04. And why don't you try the last one, 24 divided by 60. Think about dividing or breaking 60 down into 6 times 10 and how you might use that to use basic facts to solve the problem. Check back to see if your thinking matches mine. Okay, so we can start because we know the basic fact, 24 divided by 6 is 4. And so 4 divided by 10, if our decimal point is after the whole number 4, when we divide by 10, it's going to move one place to the left. So we would have 4/10 or 0.4. Oops, I can't write that far over on the screen. 0.4. That's where my answer would go. In today's lesson, we talked about dividing decimals by 10. We also talked about how we can divide decimals by multiples of 10 and use the same rule as dividing whole numbers by multiples of 10.